Hello, boys and girls. Now, don't be scared. Auntie Katie's reading this story in her monster outfit, but it's okay because it's Auntie Katie underneath it all. So today we're going to read Mr. Jelly by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Jelly by Roger Hargreaves. Poor Mr. Jelly was frightened of everything and anything. At the slightest little thing, he would quiver and tremble and shake and turn to jelly. So it's not really surprising to find that Mr. Jelly lives as far away from anybody that he can find. In the middle of a wood, miles and miles from anywhere. There's Mr. Jelly's house in the middle of the wood. This story begins one morning when Mr. Jelly was asleep. It was a beautiful autumn morning. The sun was shining. The leaves on the trees had turned a glorious red, and the wind stirred gently in the treetops. A single leaf fell gently from the tree right outside Mr. Jelly's house and quietly brushed against his bedroom window as it fell. Mr. Jelly awoke with a start. "What's that terrible noise?" he cried. "Oh heavens, the house is falling down. Oh disaster! It's an earthquake! Oh calamity! It's the end of the world!" And hid under the bedclothes, trembling with fright. Oh, for a leaf! After an hour, by which time he realised that his house wasn't falling down, and there wasn't an earthquake, and the world wasn't coming to an end, Mr. Jelly peeked out from under the bedclothes. "Phew," he said. "Thank goodness for that." And he got up and went downstairs to make his breakfast. There he is, coming out from under the bedclothes, because he was so frightened he had to sit under the bedclothes because of the leaf. Mr. Jelly poured some cornflakes out of a packet into a bowl. He then poured some milk onto the cornflakes. Then he went to the cupboard to get some sugar. Crackle, crackle went the cornflakes in the milk. "Oh, goodness gracious," cried Mr. Jelly, diving under the kitchen table. "Oh dear, I hear guns. Oh calamity, it's war." But of course it wasn't. And of course Mr. Jelly eventually came out from under the table and ate up all his cornflakes. There he is, coming from under the table. After breakfast, Mr. Jelly thought he'd go for a walk. He was walking through the woods which surrounded his house when a worm poked his head out of the ground. "Morning," said the worm cheerfully to Mr. Jelly. Mr. Jelly nearly jumped out of his skin. "What?" he shouted. "Who's there?" And he saw the worm. "Oh, goodness heavens, it's a snake! Oh dear, a man-eating snake! Oh calamity, I'm going to be eaten alive!" And he jumped up into a tree. There's the worm. And there's Mr. Jelly into the tree because he thought the worm was a snake. Mr. Jelly's scared of everything. "What a performance," commented the worm, and went back into his hole. After an hour, Mr. Jelly felt brave enough to climb down from the tree and continued his walk. Eventually he came out of the other side of the wood and into a field. Mr. Jelly glanced nervously around. It was an empty field. Or was it? There's Mr. Jelly coming out of the woods. In the long grass in the middle of the field, unseen by Mr. Jelly, there was a tramp enjoying a sleep in the autumn sun. Mr. Jelly picked his way cautiously through the grass. The tramp, fast asleep, snored. "What was that?" shrieked Mr. Jelly. "It's a lion! I heard it growl. Oh goodness gracious! Oh dear me, a lion, a huge lion with enormous teeth, a huge lion with sharp teeth that's going to bite me in two, a huge ferocious lion with enormous sharp teeth that's going to bite me in two, if not three." And he fainted. There's Mr. Jelly fainting for the thought of the lion. We know it's not a lion, don't we? All this commotion awakened the tramp. Who yawned, stretched, and saw Mr. Jelly lying on the ground beside him. "Oh dear," he said, for he was a kindly tramp. "Oh dear," and he picked up Mr. Jelly and placed him gently in the palm of his hand. There's the tramp and Mr. Jelly. Mr. Jelly came to and sat up, rubbing his eyes. Then he saw the tramp's face looking at him. "Oh, disaster!" he screamed. "Oh, calamity! It's a giant, an ogre! Oh, gracious! He's going to have me for breakfast." My," said the tramp gently. "You're a nervous little chap, aren't you? What's your name?" "Mr. Jelly," stammered Mr. Jelly. There's Mr. Tramp talking to Mr. Jelly. "I used to be nervous like you," said the tramp, "but I learned how not to be. Would you like me to tell you the secret?" Mr. Jelly quivered and shook and said, "Yes, please." "It's very simple," continued the tramp. "All you have to do is count up to 10, and you'll find that whatever's frightening you isn't quite so frightening after all." Then he set Mr. Jelly gently down on the grass. "Remember," he said to Mr. Jelly, "count to 10, and off he went." There's Mr. Jelly and there's the tramp counting to 10. Mr. Jelly thought it would be a very good idea if he went home immediately. Back across the field he went, back through the woods he went. He was walking through the woods when he stepped on a little twig. Snap went the twig. Mr. Jelly jumped twice his own height in terror. There is Mr. Jelly jumping. "What was that?" he shrieked. "That terrible snapping noise. It's a tree falling down that's going to crush me into pieces. Oh, calamity! It's a crocodile hiding in the bushes, snapping its teeth. Oh, disaster! It's..." And then he stopped. He took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, he said, and saw what had gone snap was a twig, a silly old twig. "Phew," he said. There's Mr. Jelly, calming himself down. Mr. Jelly had almost reached his house when a leaf drifted gently down from a tree on top of him. "Help! Police! Murder!" he screamed. "I'm being kidnapped! Oh, calamity! It's ruffians with guns! They're going to..." And then he stopped. He took a deep breath. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then he saw what had fallen on him was only a leaf. Nothing but a leaf. A stupid red leaf. "It works," he said out loud in wonderment. There he is, smiling. And do you know, it did work. After that moment, Mr. Jelly became a changed man. Well, you can see that by looking at him, can't you? He's not so jelly anymore, and he never shrieks or shouts or screams or quivers or shakes or trembles anymore. And he never hides under the bedclothes anymore. Well, not very often anyway. Mr. Jelly by Roger Hargreaves.